Ever catch yourself just like thinking about, what it means to be you? And I don't mean like your name or your favorite color, but like the actual feeling of being conscious.
Yeah.
Of experiencing the world from inside your own head.
It's trippy when you actually stop to think about it.
It's a total trip.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today with this book, Self Comes to Mind by Antonio Damasio.
Great book.
So good. Basically, Damasio is trying to unpack how our brains create the feeling of being, well, me.
And what's fascinating is how he approaches it.
Yeah.
He doesn't just go the easy route and say, oh, consciousness, well, it's a mystery. He digs into the actual mechanics of how our brains build a sense of self from the ground up.
Okay, so where does he even begin with something as big as like the entire concept of self?
He starts with what he calls the proto-self. And this is where things get really interesting. This isn't some abstract idea, but a real physical part of the brain.
Okay.
The brainstem, one of the oldest parts of our brain.
Hey, really? The brainstem. We're talking about the part that's basically in charge of keeping us alive, right?
Exactly. Breathing, heartbeat, all that essential stuff. And that's Damasio's point. Our sense of self, something we think of as totally mental, is actually deeply rooted in our physical being. See, the proto-self is constantly getting hit with all these signals from the body. Your heart rate, your temperature, even your gut feelings.
It's like a 24/7 channel of information.
Exactly. And it's sending signals right back. A non-stop conversation happening below the surface of our awareness, constantly shaping our sense of self.
So even when I'm like totally zoned out, my body's telling my brain, hey, we're still here. And that's contributing to my sense of self. That's wild.
Exactly. Think of it like the foundation of a house. You might not always see it, but it's what everything else is built upon. And here's where it gets even cooler. This back and forth between the body and brain creates what Damasio calls primordial feelings.
Primordial feelings. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Think about the most basic sensations of being alive. Not full-blown emotions like joy or sadness, but more like, am I relaxed or agitated? A surge of energy versus feeling totally drained.
Okay, so like those subtle shifts in how my body feels throughout the day.
Yes, those count.
Like when I have that third cup of coffee and I'm like, yes, I can conquer the world. That's my proto-self doing its thing.
You got it. It's about those subtle, wordless feelings that color your whole experience of being you.
This is mind-blowing. But okay, so the proto-self is like the foundation. How do we go from these like basic feelings to the whole me package? The one with memories, dreams, that never-ending to-do list.
That's where things get even more interesting. The proto-self is just the first layer. Then, as we interact with the world, a new layer pops up.
Okay.
The core self.
Right.
This is the part that figures out, hey, there's me, and then there's everything else.
It's like drawing a line in the sand.
Exactly.
So it's not just about feeling, it's about realizing you can act, you can affect the world around you.
Exactly. Every interaction, every choice we make helps build up that core self. Testing boundaries, understanding cause and effect. It's all part of the process.
That's a really cool way to think about it. So we go from just existing, feeling those primordial vibes, to realizing, hey, I can actually do something in this world. But Damasio doesn't stop there, does he? There's this whole other part of being human, right? The part that remembers, that plans, the inner storyteller.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is where the autobiographical self comes in.
Okay, I am so ready to dive into that.
So we were talking about the autobiographical self,
right? That inner storyteller.
Yeah, it's like this tapestry woven from our memories, our future plans, how we see ourselves in the grand scheme of things,
Okay, so this layer of self takes all the raw data from those earlier levels, the feeling, the doing, and turns it into like a narrative, my story.
Exactly. It's this constantly evolving story that allows for those more complex emotions, self-awareness, even pondering big questions like, what is consciousness?
Okay, now that's meta, but I like it. So to recap, we've got the foundation, the proto-self, rooted in our physical sensations.
All right.
Then, boom, the core self kicks in. Hey, I can interact with this world. And then the autobiographical self comes along like, hold my drink, I'm going to turn this into an epic tale. But how does consciousness itself actually come online? Is there a magic switch, a poof moment?
Well, that's the thing. Damasio says there isn't one single moment. He compares the brain to, get this, a bustling city.
Okay, a city. I'm intrigued, but I need more.
Think about it. You've got all these different districts, each specializing in something unique. You've got finance, you've got art, you've got government. They're all connected, working together, and it's that combined activity that makes the city hum.
Okay, I'm with you. So there's no little conductor in my head saying, all right, time for consciousness, everyone. It's more like this beautifully orchestrated yet slightly chaotic collaboration.
Exactly. And while the thinking part of our brain, the cortex, plays a big role, Damasio really emphasizes that it all starts with that brainstem.
Right, home of the proto-self, the OG of the self.
Exactly.
But if that brain-body connection is so essential for consciousness, what happens if something goes wrong, like with a brain injury?
That's a question that has fascinated neuroscientists forever. Damasio talks about how even damage to a tiny part of the brainstem can have a huge impact on consciousness. It shows just how vital this ancient part of our brain is.
Wow. So even though it's often overlooked compared to the thinking parts of the brainstem is essential. It's kind of humbling, you know? This little part of our brain, shared with so many creatures, is crucial for our human experience.
Absolutely. And it highlights that consciousness isn't some separate entity, but a product of our biology, shaped by the same forces as every other living thing.
That makes me feel strangely connected to, like, everything, not just a brain floating around, but a living, breathing, feeling part of, well, everything. But this whole idea of the brain constructing reality, does that mean it's all an illusion? Are we living in the Matrix here?
It's a classic question. I appreciate how Damasio handles it. He says, just because our experience is constructed doesn't mean the world around us isn't real. It's more like we each have a unique lens we're looking through.
Our personalized brain lens.
Precisely. And that lens is shaped by our personal history, our experiences, our quirks, everything. So two people can look at the same thing and have completely different experiences.
It's like we're all walking around with our own custom Instagram filters shaping how we see the world.
I like that.
But where do imagination and creativity fit in? If our brains love patterns and familiarity, how do we come up with new ideas, new possibilities?
And that's where things get really exciting.
Yeah.
Because while our brains do crave patterns, they're not limited to just replicating them. We have this incredible capacity to imagine, to break free from the concrete and explore the world of what if.
So even though our brains are rooted in the physical, we can still transcend those limitations. That's pretty inspiring when you think about it.
It really is. And this is what I find so empowering about Damasio's work. He doesn't shy away from the brain's complexity, but reminds us of its immense potential. We are not just passive observers. We have the ability to shape our reality, to dream new dreams, to create things that never existed before.
So if our sense of self, this me we've been unpacking, is a process and not fixed, does that mean we can consciously influence its development?
No, you're hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly the question Damasio wants us to grapple with.
Oh, cliffhanger. Looks like we're saving that for part 3. You left us hanging there. So is our sense of self totally up for grabs? Can we really consciously change who we are?
Well, Damasio would say that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
He argues that understanding how our brain constructs the self isn't just some theoretical exercise. It's a roadmap for personal growth.
Okay, so it's not just about the how of consciousness, but the so what. How can we actually use this knowledge to live better, more fulfilling lives? That's what I want to know.
It starts with awareness, right? When we understand that everything, our experiences, the people we surround ourselves with, even the stuff we read online, shapes our sense of self, we can be more intentional about those inputs.
So it's like giving our brains a good decluttering. Out with the mental junk food, in with the nourishing stuff.
I love that analogy. It's about being mindful of what we let influence us. Creating experiences that support the kind of person we want to be.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, if I'm constantly on social media, comparing myself to everyone else, that'll shape my sense of self differently than if I'm, say, spending time in nature, getting lost in a creative project, or just having deep conversations.
Exactly. It boils down to agency. We're not just passive passengers along for the ride. We have choices.
We're the architects of our own experience.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message.
Right.
It means we have the capacity to change, to evolve, to keep growing throughout our lives.
Okay, so Damasio is basically handing us the ultimate self-help guide, but one that's backed by science, which makes it even cooler.
Right. And it goes even deeper than that. When we realize our sense of self is something that's built, it opens the door to more compassion. For ourselves and for others. Well, think about it. If we accept that our own perspectives, our beliefs, our values are all a product of this ongoing construction project, it's easier to understand that other people's perspectives are too.
Oh, wow. It's like an empathy hack built right in.
Exactly. Recognizing that we're all just trying to make sense of the world with the brains we've got, that can be a powerful way to combat judgment, prejudice, all those things that divide us.
It's like Damasio is giving us a peek behind the curtain of what makes us human. And in doing so, he's revealing not just how complex it all is, but the incredible possibilities that exist.
Exactly. I think that's what makes his work so important, especially today. When we understand ourselves and how our minds work, that's when we can start to build bridges, connect with each other, create a more compassionate and just world.
It's like a call to action. Time to step into a new era of consciousness, one that embraces our interconnectedness, our shared humanity, and our power to shape a better future for everyone.
Beautifully said. It's a vision worth working towards. And it's a journey that starts with each of us choosing to explore the mysteries of our own minds.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those mysteries. Remember, knowing your brain is just the first step. The real adventure is using that knowledge to live a more conscious, compassionate, and fulfilling life. Until next time, happy deep diving.